She thought denying one quiet woman a hotel room would be another forgettable act of luxury snobbery. But before the hour ended, that single decision would send tremors through a $40 million deal and leave the entire Grand Ashford Hotel standing in stunned silence. The Grand Ashford rose over Midtown Manhattan like a monument to old money, its brass revolving doors gleaming beneath the late afternoon sun, crystal chandeliers spilling warm gold across polished marble floors, and bellmen in tailored uniforms moving luggage worth more than some people's monthly rent. This was not the kind of place where anyone expected to see Claire Bennett. At 35, Claire looked more like a tired school volunteer than the wife of one of America's most powerful investors. She wore faded blue jeans, soft white sneakers, and a cream cardigan that had seen better seasons. Her chestnut hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, and the only jewelry on her was a slim wedding band that caught almost no light at all. Yet Claire walked through those towering glass doors with the calm posture of someone who had every right to be there. In one hand, she carried a leather folder filled with documents for the Bennett Children Foundation's annual charity gala. In the other, a modest overnight bag. Her husband, Jonathan Bennett, had flown in from San Francisco that morning after closing meetings with investors, and he was due to arrive within the hour. Tonight, the Grand Ashford was hosting the foundation's largest fundraiser of the year, an event backed by Bennett Holdings and attended by city donors, board members, and several national press outlets. Jonathan had insisted on reserving the presidential suite so Claire could settle in before the chaos began. Check in, get some tea, and breathe for 30 minutes, he had told her over the phone with that low, steady voice she loved. I'll meet you upstairs. Claire smiled at the memory as she crossed the vast lobby. Around her, women in designer coats rolled expensive luggage toward private elevators while businessmen in $1,000 loafers spoke into wireless headsets. The room smelled faintly of lilies, polished wood, and expensive perfume. Conversations softened as Claire approached the front desk, not because anyone knew who she was, but because she looked painfully out of place against the hotel's carefully curated elegance. Behind the marble counter stood Vanessa Whitmore, front desk manager, blonde hair twisted into a perfect knot, navy blazer sharply pressed, pearl earrings catching the chandelier light. Vanessa had worked at the Grand Ashford for 9 years and had developed what she considered an excellent instinct for identifying high-value clientele within seconds. One glance at Claire's worn cardigan and practical sneakers, and Vanessa's polished smile cooled by several degrees. Claire offered a gentle one of her own. Hi, I'm checking in. Reservation should be under Bennett. Vanessa's manicured fingers tapped the keyboard, though her eyes spent far more time scanning Claire than the monitor. One moment, she said crisply. The reservation appeared immediately. Presidential suite. Bennett Holdings executive account. VIP gala access. Vanessa saw every detail. She also saw the woman standing in front of her and felt instant disbelief. This had to be some kind of mistake, or worse, someone trying to use a wealthy name to gain access. Vanessa leaned back slightly, folding her hands. I'm sorry, she said, her voice now carrying just enough volume for nearby guests to hear. But I'm not seeing any valid room available for you. Claire blinked once, confused. She reached into her folder and slid the printed confirmation across the counter. My husband booked it 3 days ago. Jonathan Bennett. Vanessa glanced at the paper, then slowly pushed it back as if it were something mildly offensive. Her lips tightened into a thin professional smile. Ma'am, she said, eyes flicking over Claire's simple clothes one more time. The Grand Ashford reserves premium accommodations for verified executive guests only. Claire stared at Vanessa for a moment, certain she had misheard. The printed confirmation still rested beneath her fingertips, the bold black letters clearly stating Presidential Suite, Bennett Holdings executive account, one night, private gala access included. She slid it forward again with careful politeness. I believe there must be some confusion, she said softly. My husband arranged everything personally. Vanessa did not even look down this time. Instead, she offered the kind of smile reserved for people being tolerated, not welcomed. As I explained, ma'am, we cannot release premium suites to individuals who are not properly verified through executive channels. The words were clean, professional, and perfectly sharpened to wound. Claire felt heat rise into her cheeks. Around her, a silver-haired couple waiting to check and exchanged a glance. A young concierge pretended to organize key cards while listening closely. Humiliation had a way of spreading through a room before anyone said it aloud. Claire swallowed and kept her voice even. Jonathan Bennett is my husband. He should be here shortly. If you could simply call the number on file. Vanessa lifted one manicured hand, cutting her off. Mrs. Bennett, is it? She asked, stressing the title just enough to reveal she did not believe it. Do you have any executive identification, company credentials, or authorization documents beyond this printed sheet? Claire hesitated. Jonathan handled corporate reservations constantly, and she had never once been asked to prove she belonged beside her own last name. No, she admitted quietly. Vanessa gave a short nod as if that settled everything. Then I am afraid there is nothing further I can do. She turned her attention to a sharply dressed man who had just stepped up beside Claire. Welcome to the Grand Ashford, sir. Let me get you checked in immediately. The man had arrived after Claire, yet within seconds Vanessa's voice transformed into warm velvet. Claire stood frozen as the businessman was handed sparkling water and a sweet key with smiling efficiency. The contrast landed harder than any direct insult could have. She was not simply being delayed. She was being ranked, measured, found unworthy. Claire tightened her grip on the leather folder until the edges pressed into her palm. She had spent years beside Jonathan attending board dinners, charity luncheons, donor receptions, and private meetings with senators and CEOs, yet she still chose cardigans over couture and comfort over display. She had always believed dignity did not need a costume. Standing there now under a chandelier worth more than her first apartment, she felt the room silently disagree. When Vanessa finally looked back at her, there was impatience in her eyes. Ma'am, if you are unable to verify executive status, I do need to ask that you step aside. We have paying guests waiting. Paying guests. The phrase struck like a slap wrapped in silk. Claire opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her wedding band suddenly felt absurdly small. I am a paying guest, she said, though the confidence had thinned in her voice. Vanessa exhaled through her nose, no longer bothering to hide the skepticism. The Grand Ashford serves a very exclusive clientele. We have had situations before involving unauthorized claims on premium reservations, and we take those matters seriously. There it was. Not confusion. Not policy. Accusation. A few heads turned more openly now. Claire could feel the eyes, the assumptions forming before she had any chance to defend herself. Someone near the concierge desk whispered. Vanessa leaned slightly toward the security panel beneath the counter, her fingers hovering with deliberate meaning. I would strongly suggest waiting elsewhere until the verified account holder arrives. Claire's throat tightened. Verified account holder. As if she were some stranger trying to slip into a life that did not belong to her. She looked around the glittering lobby, at polished shoes crossing marble, at crystal reflections dancing across the ceiling, and for the first time since walking in, she felt very small. Claire nodded once because it was the only movement she trusted herself to make. Arguing in that moment would not restore dignity. It would only feed the silent theater already forming around her. She lifted her overnight bag and stepped away from the front desk, heels of passing strangers clicking across the marble as if the hotel itself were keeping time with her embarrassment. Vanessa had already moved on to another guest, her voice bright and welcoming now, offering restaurant recommendations and spa vouchers. As though the last 3 minutes had not happened at all. That was what stung most. To Vanessa, this was routine. A quiet dismissal. Another forgettable woman sent to the margins. Claire walked toward a seating area near the tall front windows where ivory armchairs overlooked Fifth Avenue traffic. Outside, yellow cabs crawled through late afternoon congestion, and black sedans pulled up one after another beneath the hotel awning. She set her bag beside her chair, but did not sit immediately. Her hands trembled too much. She reached for her phone and stared at Jonathan's name on the screen. One tap, and this would end. Jonathan would call the general manager, perhaps the hotel owner, and by the time she looked up, every employee in this lobby would be apologizing. Yet Claire hesitated. She hated using Jonathan's power as a shield. For 7 years of marriage, they had promised each other something simple. His money would never become her weapon, and her humility would never become his embarrassment. She had built the Bennett Children Foundation largely on her own, visiting underfunded schools, meeting with struggling families, organizing scholarship drives in church basements and community centers. People respected her there because of her work, not because of the last name on the gala invitation. But this lobby was not a school gymnasium in Queens. This was a palace built on appearances, and appearances had already judged her guilty. Claire slowly lowered the phone without calling. Maybe Jonathan would arrive in a few minutes. Maybe she could simply wait and avoid making a scene. She sank into the armchair at last, keeping her back straight as guests drifted past. Every few seconds, she could feel glances sliding toward her, lingering on the woman with the small bag who had clearly been moved away from the front desk. Near the elevators, two women in designer trench coats whispered behind oversized sunglasses. At the concierge station, a bellman stole curious looks in her direction. No one knew the details, but public discomfort had its own unmistakable scent. Then the lobby doors revolved again, and the atmosphere shifted. Men in dark suits entered carrying branded event cases. Florists wheeled in towering white arrangements. Two camera operators followed behind a woman with a clipboard shouting instructions about donor signage and media placement. Claire recognized the Bennett Foundation logo printed on one of the cases and felt her stomach sink. The gala team had arrived. In less than 2 hours, this lobby would be filled with philanthropists, city officials, and reporters covering the largest educational fundraiser of the season. And she, the foundation chairwoman, was sitting displaced in a corner like an unwelcome visitor. Across the room, Vanessa noticed the incoming event staff and immediately straightened. Her expression sharpened with fresh urgency. She whispered something to the concierge, glanced toward Claire, then whispered again. Claire saw it happen in real time. Vanessa did not want a casually dressed woman associated with confusion at the front desk while the hotel's elite guests streamed in. Optics mattered more than truth. A uniformed security attendant, older and clearly uncomfortable, began walking toward Claire with measured steps. He paused in front of her chair and offered a strained professional smile. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "the front desk has asked if you would mind waiting outside the lobby until your party arrives." Claire looked up at him, and for one suspended second, the noise of rolling luggage, murmured check-ins, and clinking glassware seemed to disappear entirely. Claire blinked slowly, certain she had never heard a more polite version of humiliation in her life. Wait outside the lobby. Not in the lounge. Not by the cafe. Outside. As though her presence beside velvet chairs and marble columns somehow threatened the image this hotel wanted to sell. She looked past the security attendant toward Vanessa. The front desk manager was pretending to review reservations, but the slight lift at the corner of her mouth gave everything away. This was intentional now. No longer skepticism. No longer confusion. Vanessa wanted Claire removed before the wealthy donors and television cameras associated with the evening gala began flooding the entrance. Claire rose carefully, refusing to let her hands shake where anyone could see. "Did the front desk say why?" she asked. The attendant shifted his weight, embarrassed to be the messenger. "They just asked that non-registered visitors clear the main seating area during executive event preparations." Non-registered visitors. Claire almost laughed at the absurdity of it, but the lump in her throat held the sound hostage. She picked up her bag and leather folder, each suddenly feeling 10 pounds heavier than when she had entered. As she walked toward the revolving doors, conversations dimmed around her in that peculiar way public shame always creates. No one spoke directly. No one intervened. But everyone watched. A man near the concierge desk lowered his newspaper. A woman adjusting diamond bracelets paused mid-motion. Two young event assistants carrying floral charts glanced at each other, uncertain whether they had just witnessed a customer dispute or something worse. Claire kept her chin level and continued walking. Outside, the October air hit cooler than she expected. A breeze funneled between the buildings of Midtown, lifting strands of hair from her ponytail as traffic rolled by in slow polished lines. The Grand Ashford's doorman continued opening doors for luxury SUVs, greeting arriving guests with rehearsed warmth while Claire stood off to the side beneath a stone column like someone waiting for a bus. The irony would have been funny if it had not hurt so much. Through the glass, she could still see Vanessa at the desk, moving briskly now as more gala staff entered. Gold sign stands were being positioned. White roses were arranged near the ballroom corridor. A media backdrop bearing the Bennett Children Foundation crest was unrolled by technicians. Claire stared at her own foundation logo and felt a hollow twist in her chest. The event carrying her family's name was being polished inside, while she had been politely exiled from the building hosting it. Her phone vibrated. "Jonathan." She answered immediately. "Hey," came his calm, familiar voice over the city noise. "We just landed at Teterboro 20 minutes ago. Car is about 15 minutes out. Did you get checked in?" Claire opened her mouth, but nothing emerged for a second. She watched a bellman wheel in a rack of garment bags worth more than her entire wardrobe. "There was a small issue," she said finally, forcing steadiness into each word. Jonathan was silent. He knew her too well. "Claire," he said, lower now, "what kind of issue?" Before she could answer, the hotel doors opened again, and a pair of local reporters stepped onto the sidewalk, discussing tonight's Bennett Gala and the rumored expansion partnership tied to it. $40 million, one of them said casually, adjusting his camera strap. "Biggest hospitality education sponsorship in the city this year." Claire closed her eyes for half a second. Jonathan heard only her breathing. "Claire, talk to me." She turned and looked through the glass once more. Inside, Vanessa was smiling at donors, gesturing grandly toward the ballroom, completely unaware that the quiet woman she had pushed outside was now holding the single phone call capable of changing every plan this hotel had made for the evening. Claire tightened her fingers around the device. "Jonathan," she said softly, "they would not let me into our room." There was no immediate explosion on the other end of the line. Jonathan Bennett did not raise his voice when he was angry. That was what made it worse. Claire heard only one slow inhale, then the quiet click of a car, doors shutting somewhere in the background. "Tell me exactly what happened," he said. Claire glanced toward the glass entrance as another cluster of donors stepped inside, laughing beneath the hotel awning. She gave him the short version because anything longer might crack her composure. Reservation denied. Executive verification demanded. Asked to leave the lobby. Moved outside. With every sentence, Jonathan said nothing. Yet she could picture his jaw tightening the way it did during hostile negotiations. When she finished, there was a pause, so still she could hear Midtown horns 3 lanes away. "Stay where you are," he said at last. "Do not go back inside. I am 3 minutes out." The call ended. Claire lowered the phone and stared at her reflection in the Grand Ashford's towering glass. Cream cardigan. Windblown ponytail. Small overnight bag. She looked exactly like the woman Vanessa had judged her to be. Harmless, ordinary, ignorable. What Vanessa could not see was that the charity gala blooming behind those chandeliers existed because Claire had spent 18 months building it from handwritten donor letters, school district meetings, and fundraising breakfasts in church fellowship halls across New York and New Jersey. Jonathan's company had written the large checks, yes, but Claire had built the trust. Tonight was supposed to fund literacy centers in 12 underserved neighborhoods. Instead, she was standing on the sidewalk like an inconvenience. Inside, the pace accelerated. Through the glass, she watched event photographers test flashes near the ballroom entrance. A city councilwoman in emerald silk arrived with 2 aides. Hotel servers crossed the lobby carrying trays of crystal flutes. Vanessa floated among it all with renewed confidence, her posture almost regal now that the executive crowd had begun appearing. Twice she glanced toward the sidewalk, confirming Claire remained outside. Each glance carried the same silent message, problem contained. Then a low ripple moved beneath the line of waiting cars. One doorman straightened. Another adjusted his gloves. Across the curb, 3 black SUVs turned the corner in perfect sequence and rolled toward the front entrance with dark polished precision. Even before the first vehicle fully stopped, the energy changed. Drivers nearby slowed to look. 2 bellmen exchanged quick whispers. Claire knew Jonathan preferred efficiency over theatrics, which meant if multiple vehicles were arriving, he had not come alone. The front SUV door opened. 2 Bennett Holdings security staff stepped out first, scanning the entrance with practiced discretion. The second vehicle opened, and Jonathan Bennett emerged in a navy wool overcoat over a sharply cut charcoal suit, silver tie catching the fading daylight. At 43, Jonathan carried the kind of composed authority that did not need raised volume or flashy jewelry. He simply occupied space as though decisions happened around him by default. Behind him climbed out Martin Keene, Chief Financial Officer of Bennett Holdings, and Denise Holloway, Director of Foundation Partnerships. Claire's eyes widened slightly. This was no simple hotel arrival. This was executive presence. Through the glass, Vanessa noticed the motorcade and immediately brightened, signaling to a concierge. She assumed, as any ambitious hotel manager would, that major VIP guests had arrived for the gala. The general manager, Edward Langston, came hurrying from the ballroom corridor, straightening his tuxedo jacket as he nearly jogged toward the revolving doors. Staff lined subtly into greeting positions. Smiles sharpened, shoulders lifted. Claire remained beneath the stone column, half in shadow, unnoticed by everyone except the one man, now scanning the entrance with cold, searching eyes. Jonathan took 2 steps onto the sidewalk, saw her standing there with bag in hand, and stopped completely. Even from 30 feet away, Claire saw the exact second he understood. Jonathan crossed the remaining distance without haste, but every measured step seemed to pull the air out of the sidewalk. Claire had seen that expression before in boardrooms when billion-dollar terms changed over a single sentence. Controlled, silent, dangerous in the calmest possible way. He stopped in front of her, eyes moving from the overnight bag at her feet to the leather folder in her hand, and finally to the faint flush still lingering on her face. "They put you outside?" he asked. Claire gave the smallest nod. Jonathan looked through the glass doors toward the glowing lobby where staff members now stood arranged in polished welcome formation, completely unaware that their most important guest had no interest in being welcomed. Martin Keene followed Jonathan's gaze and muttered under his breath, while Denise Holloway's professional smile disappeared entirely. Edward Langston, the general manager, pushed through the revolving doors at that exact moment, hands extended, face beaming. "Mr. Bennett, welcome to the Grand Ashford. We are honored to host Bennett Holdings and the Foundation this evening. Everything is prepared for the gala, and your presidential suite is." Jonathan did not even turn fully toward him. "My wife was denied entry to that suite," he said. Edward stopped mid-sentence. The words seemed to hit him physically. "I am sorry." Jonathan finally faced him, and the temperature in Edward's smile collapsed. "Claire Bennett checked in 40 minutes ago. She was refused her reservation, questioned as an unauthorized guest, and removed from your lobby." Each phrase landed slower than the last, giving Edward just enough time to understand the scale of what he was hearing. Through the glass, Vanessa noticed the interaction outside and frowned. She could not hear the words, but she clearly recognized that the VIP she had expected to charm was now standing beside the woman she had dismissed. Her face drained of color even from a distance. Edward blinked rapidly. "That cannot be correct," he said, though his voice had already lost conviction. Jonathan turned his head slightly toward Claire. Was she the one at the desk? Claire looked past him and met Vanessa's frozen stare through the entrance. "Yes," she said quietly. Edward followed her line of sight, saw Vanessa, and in that instant every polished assumption he had carried about tonight shattered into pieces. He spun toward the doors and snapped his fingers sharply for the concierge. "Get Ms. Whitmore out here now." The concierge nearly stumbled in his rush. Inside, Vanessa straightened, forced a smile, and walked toward the revolving doors with the mechanical stiffness of someone trying to act normal while panic flooded every nerve. Guests near the front desk began watching. Donors arriving with invitation envelopes slowed their steps. Camera operators waiting for gala footage turned instinctively toward the commotion. Vanessa stepped onto the sidewalk with rehearsed poise. "Mr. Bennett," she began brightly, "welcome to the Grand Ashford. I believe there may have been a misunderstanding regarding this individual, and this individual." Jonathan's voice was not loud, yet it cut through traffic noise, hotel chatter, and every rehearsed line Vanessa had prepared. He stepped aside just enough to reveal Claire fully. "This individual is Claire Bennett, chairwoman of the Bennett Children Foundation, co-host of the event filling your ballroom tonight, and my wife." The revolving door behind Vanessa continued turning, but the lobby beyond seemed to stop moving altogether. Edward Langston's mouth parted soundlessly. Martin Keene folded his arms. Denise Holloway watched Vanessa with the detached pity one reserves for people who have just ruined themselves in public. Vanessa opened her lips, closed them, then tried again. I was simply following verification policy." Jonathan stared at her for one long second. "Your policy put the woman funding half this building on the sidewalk." And suddenly, from inside the lobby, every nearby conversation fell into complete silence. Vanessa felt every eye in the entrance lock onto her at once. The practiced confidence she had worn all afternoon cracked so visibly that even the valet nearest the curb looked away out of second-hand discomfort. "Mr. Bennett, I assure you, I had no way of knowing," she began, but the sentence collapsed under its own weakness. No way of knowing. Because Claire had worn sneakers instead of heels. Because her cardigan was soft instead of designer labeled. Because she had stood quietly rather than announcing net worth like a credential. Edward Langston stepped forward, face pale beneath the hotel's golden lights. "Ms. Whitmore, please stop talking." His voice came out harsher than intended, sharpened by pure panic. Vanessa turned to him as though searching for rescue, but Edward offered none. Around them, the sidewalk had become an unwilling audience. Donors arriving for the gala slowed to a halt, invitation envelopes still in hand. A local reporter near the entrance lowered his camera from the Bennett Foundation backdrop and aimed it subtly toward the unfolding confrontation. Two women from the city education board whispered Claire's name with dawning recognition. Jonathan Bennett noticed all of it and remained perfectly composed. That was what made the scene unbearable for hotel management. He was not shouting. He was not threatening. He was simply allowing witnesses to absorb the truth. "Edward," Jonathan said, adjusting one cuff with chilling calm. "Do you know why Bennett Holdings selected the Grand Ashford for tonight's event?" Edward swallowed. "Because of our partnership proposal, sir." "No," Jonathan replied. "Because my wife believed this hotel understood dignity." Claire looked down for a moment, the words landing heavier than the cold October air. She had indeed defended the Grand Ashford months earlier when other venues competed for the gala. She had praised its charitable outreach brochures, its polished service language, its promise that every guest would be treated with equal grace. Standing there now, she realized she had trusted a brochure more than a culture. Jonathan continued, his tone still even. Tonight was not simply a fundraiser. Bennett Holdings was scheduled to announce a $40 million educational hospitality initiative with this property as flagship partner. Press coverage, multi-year sponsorship, national branding. My board signed the final approval packet this morning. Edward's knees seemed to lose structure beneath his tailored tuxedo. Martin Keene quietly removed a thick envelope from his briefcase, the one containing the partnership documents intended for tonight's ceremonial signing. Denise Holloway held the gala itinerary against her chest and said nothing, but her silence carried executive finality. Vanessa stared from face to face as the arithmetic finally assembled in her mind. One reservation denied. One woman publicly displaced. $40 million now hanging by a thread she herself had cut. "Sir, please," Edward said, stepping closer. "Allow us to correct this immediately. We can escort Mrs. Bennett to the suite, provide a private apology, anything necessary." Jonathan looked at him the way experienced men look at contracts already breached. "You are still speaking as if this is about a room." The sentence dropped like ice water. Through the revolving doors, the lobby remained motionless. Servers with champagne trays had stopped mid-step. Bellmen stood frozen beside luggage carts. Even Vanessa no longer attempted explanation. Claire slowly lifted her eyes and met Jonathan's profile. She knew that face. He had moved beyond irritation. He was now making decisions. A television producer entering for gala coverage whispered to her assistant, "Keep filming." Edward heard that and visibly flinched. Public embarrassment was no longer a risk. It was an active event. Jonathan extended his hand toward Martin without looking. Martin placed the partnership envelope into it. Jonathan held the sealed documents for one quiet second, then turned them so Edward Langston could clearly read the Bennett Holdings crest across the front. "This," Jonathan said, "was supposed to be your hotel's biggest night of the decade." He let the envelope fall back into Martin's hand. "Now we are going to decide whether your hotel still has a night at all." Edward Langston looked as though someone had pulled the marble floor out from under him. His lips moved twice before any words came. "Mr. Bennett, please, there is no need for drastic decisions over an unfortunate misunderstanding." Jonathan turned his head with slow precision. "An unfortunate misunderstanding," he repeated, as if testing how absurd the phrase sounded in open air. Then he gestured toward Claire, still standing with her overnight bag like a guest who had nowhere to belong. "My wife was treated like an intruder at an event she built, in a hotel my company was about to elevate nationally, while your staff escorted her to the sidewalk so wealthy donors would not have to look at her cardigan. If that is your definition of misunderstanding, then your institution has a deeper problem than one front desk manager. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. Edward's face drained another shade. Vanessa opened her mouth, perhaps to apologize, perhaps to defend herself, but Denise Holloway finally spoke for the first time. "Do not," she said flatly. Vanessa closed it instantly. Denise had spent 12 years handling Bennett Foundation partnerships, and she knew the precise financial ecosystem hanging over tonight. The Grand Ashford was not simply hosting a gala. It was about to become the flagship hospitality face of a Bennett national literacy initiative spanning 12 states, with education grants, media campaigns, and annual donor conferences projected through the next 5 years. Every major donor entering that lobby expected a celebratory signing after dinner. Every local reporter expected headlines. Every executive in the hotel expected commission bonuses and industry prestige. All of it now stood on the sidewalk beneath a cold Manhattan breeze because one woman in practical shoes had been judged as visually inconvenient. Inside the entrance, whispers had turned into full stillness. Several arriving donors had recognized Jonathan and Claire. They no longer moved toward registration. They simply watched. One photographer, sensing history in the making, continued clicking discreetly from behind a floral display. Edward noticed the lens and nearly lunged toward damage control. "We can move this conversation to my office," he said desperately. "Private accommodations, immediate correction, complete staff review, anything you require." Jonathan gave a faint, humorless smile. "Privacy helps the institution, Edward, not the lesson." Claire inhaled softly. She had not expected this to become public theater, but now that it had, she understood Jonathan's instinct. If the humiliation had happened in public, then the truth deserved witnesses too. Martin Keene opened his tablet and spoke in his crisp financial cadence. "For clarity, Edward, Bennett Holdings controls tonight's venue payment, the media sponsorship, and the pending $40 million renovation line item tied to your educational partnership wing. All transfers remain unsigned until the ceremonial release at 8 o'clock. Edward stared at him in horror. Unsigned, meaning not a dollar was legally locked. Jonathan held out his hand, and Denise passed him the printed gala program embossed with gold foil. Jonathan glanced at the cover, where the words Bennett Children Foundation Annual Hope Gala shone beneath the Grand Ashford crest. Then, in front of hotel staff, donors, and media waiting with held breath, he handed it back to Denise. "Call the Regency Lexington," he said. Denise blinked once. Tonight. Martin was already dialing before she answered. Edward stepped forward involuntarily. "You cannot relocate a 500-person black tie fundraiser in 2 hours." Jonathan finally looked him dead in the eye. "Watch me." The sentence moved through the crowd like an electric current. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth. Through the glass, servers exchanged stricken looks. A donor from the education board whispered, "He is serious." Of course he was serious. Jonathan Bennett had built an empire by making impossible logistical shifts look inevitable. Denise was now issuing rapid instructions to foundation coordinators. Martin was rerouting vendor payments. Phones lit up one after another. The gala was moving. The cameras were staying. And Edward Langston began to understand, with terrible clarity, that the Grand Ashford was about to lose not only $40 million, but the entire room full of wealthy witnesses it had spent months preparing to impress. For the next 15 minutes, the Grand Ashford watched its perfect evening unravel in complete silence. Denise Holloway moved with military efficiency, rerouting florists, transportation, catering contracts, media crews, and donor arrivals to the Regency Lexington 3 blocks away. Martin Keene coordinated with Bennett Holdings legal counsel while event assistants rushed to replace signage and digital invitations. One by one, arriving guests were personally redirected by foundation staff before they could step fully inside the hotel. The polished stream of wealth Edward Langston had counted on began turning away at the curb like water changing course. Some donors looked confused. Some looked amused. All of them looked back at the Grand Ashford with the same dawning realization. This hotel had made a catastrophic mistake. Inside the lobby, champagne trays remained untouched. White floral towers stood like expensive monuments to a celebration that was no longer happening there. Bellmen waited beside luggage carts with nowhere urgent to go. Servers stared toward the entrance, listening to fragments of frantic management whispers. Vanessa Whitmore had not moved more than 2 feet. Her face, once arranged in polished superiority, now seemed almost unrecognizable beneath the weight of public collapse. Edward pulled her aside and hissed instructions through clenched teeth, but the words did not matter anymore. Everyone already knew who she was. More importantly, everyone knew what she had represented. Claire stood quietly beside Jonathan, watching the exodus with mixed disbelief and sadness. This had grown far beyond the room she simply wanted to enter. She touched Jonathan's sleeve gently. "This is enough," she murmured. Jonathan turned to her, and the steel in his expression softened just slightly. "No," he said, low enough for only her to hear. Enough would have been basic respect 40 minutes ago. Claire looked through the glass at the lobby where she had stood feeling small, questioned, and displaced because she did not look rich enough to belong to her own name. She thought of the underfunded schools this gala was meant to support, the children whose scholarship letters sat inside her leather folder, the teachers who had trusted her promises. Then she looked at Vanessa, who could not meet her eyes now. Claire stepped forward. Edward immediately straightened, as if an apology might still save him. Vanessa swallowed visibly. But Claire did not ask for an apology. She did not ask for revenge either. She simply said, in a calm voice every person near the entrance could hear, "I only asked for a room. What your hotel could not offer was something much smaller and much rarer. Respect." No one answered. There was nothing intelligent left to say. The October wind moved lightly across the sidewalk. Somewhere down the avenue, another Bennett vehicle horn sounded as redirected guests continued toward the new venue. Jonathan placed one hand at the small of Claire's back and guided her toward the waiting SUV. Before stepping in, he looked once more at Edward Langston. "Bennett Holdings is formally withdrawing the Grand Ashford from all partnership consideration effective